Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Well, it's like 11:58 East Coast time, so it's literally 2 minutes until the afternoon, but I'm really excited for everyone to join me today. Come on in. We're going to talk all about the psychology of search. My name is Garrett Sussman. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, but if you are just getting in here now, you're getting yourself settled, feel free to grab a drink. We got like a minute or left or so, but say hi in the chat. Let me know who's here. Where's everybody from? Yo, Rudiger from Nottingham. Badass. Awesome. I am from Northern Virginia. Well, I'm originally from Jersey, but I'm up here in Northern Virginia, about 45 minutes northwest of DC. It is a dreary day and unseasonably warm, but I'm excited to chat SEO. We are going to be all over the place in this webinar. Well, we're not calling it a webinar. We're calling it a live virtual event. But I'm from iPullRank. We are an SEO performance agency. We do SEO. We do content strategy. But who else is here? Come and say hi. Tell me what you want to get out of this live event, what you want to learn about when it comes to the psychology of search and SEO. And we will dive in shortly. I'm excited. There's been a lot going on in the world of SEO over the past, 12 months, 18 months, 20 plus years. So let's dive in, and I will definitely save time for some Q&A at the end. I have a lot of stuff to get to. I will also be sending out a replay of this live event after it's over, along with the deck. So there are a bunch of links, a bunch of references, a bunch of tools that I'm going to, reference here. And so you'll be able to get your hands on them, play around, and all that jazz. So without further ado, let's do this. Okay. And it's interactive. Feel free to chime in wherever you want to. So my name is Garrett Sussman. My context is going to be a big theme of this live event. Is I've got a beautiful wife and a little toddler daughter named Sammy. I've got a mini golden doodle named Lucy. I am from New Jersey, but I've lived in Louisiana, New Orleans, San Francisco, and California, and now I am in Virginia. I love to read, reading about psychology, marketing, SEO, graphic novels. And I am a sports fan. I like the 76ers, who are awful right now, and the Philadelphia Eagles football, who are amazing and maybe the best team in football. Just saying. Sorry, Detroit Lions. Where are y'all from? What do y'all do? What is your context? Because we're going to tap into all of that. And I am the director of marketing at iPullRank. So big theme here. Big theme of the psychology of search. And I know stereotypes are very much a bad word, but you have to look for generalizations, then see through the generalizations, right? So David Brooks wrote that in a recent book called How to Know a Person. And he talks about all this idea of, yes, there are all sorts of stereotypes out there. There's a lot of behavior that people as humans do. And, in order to generalize, we want to try to attract as many people as possible. We'll talk about that for SEO, but we really need to see through that and get to individuals because search is changing. So here's the harsh truth. Google incentivizes boring content. There's been a lot of conversation since the HCU came out, and lots of people lost all sorts of rankings, and we see the same copycat content at the top. But the more general the search query, the more boring it has to be, because it has to appeal to all these different types of people. And the reality is as well that SEOs care more about volume and scale than revenue. Now, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of SEOs that focus on how does our organic traffic ultimately come back to conversions, come back to revenue, to driving the business forward. But a lot of us tend to focus on vanity metrics, not completely vanity, but like supplementary to the more important KPIs. So focusing on the amount of traffic, the rankings, the search volume, that sort of thing. They're not mutually exclusive. And the other thing that I want everyone to remember is we're all playing different games. If you are a massive conglomerate brand like Walmart, you can appeal, or Amazon, you can appeal to pretty much everybody. But if you are a local dentist, then you only have a very, very small audience, and your strategies and the way that you approach your visibility on Google and various search engines and AI search is going to be different. So, no matter what, when you're seeing best practices, it doesn't always apply to everyone. What media publishers focus on is going to be different than what e-commerce focuses on. What informational sites focus on is going to be different than new crypto sites. It always changes. The industry changes. Everyone's playing a different game. And search has actually changed dramatically too. Where are our audiences? Now, on the one hand, we want to consider the fact that people are searching differently, right? We have people who are going to their normal search engines, right? You go to Google, you go to YouTube, you go to some people go to Bing, maybe. You go to social media platforms like X and TikTok and Instagram. People do actually go to those, sites to actually search. Communication platforms, you search and you get information on Slack and Discord and WhatsApp. And then in actual now AI search and chatbots, Bing, Gemini, Meta, Perplexity, ChatGPT, Bing being Copilot. The reason I bring this up is going back to this idea of volume and scale. The most bang for your buck, SEOs, we have limited resources and we can only focus on where we want to spend the most to get the most out of it. So active search and passive discovery, all of those different platforms have different functions, right? When you're going to Google and you're searching for information, it is an active search, as opposed to if you go to Google Discovery, you're actually letting information come to you based on things about you, your affinities, your demographics. So active search is typically intent driven. You seek specific answers and solutions. We all talk about search intent. It's focused. It's for a reason. You have control. You're actually going to specific parts of the platform as opposed to just passively, letting it come to you in an algorithmic page. It's efficiency based. You want to try to get it done as quick as possible. It's structured. It's providing the rankings from top to bottom, and it's limited engagement. You're not trying to endlessly be on search. Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it's fun to go driving and get lost. But on search, for the most part, it really is goal oriented. Whereas passive discovery tends to be serendipitous. Oh, I like these groups they're put in front of me. Exploratory. I'm going to go and just visit a bunch of different areas without any specific purpose. It's algorithm driven. We get so annoyed by some of these social platforms where they put stuff in front of us and we lack that control. And so when it comes to that search volume idea, we want to think about where are our audience? Where are the most people? Where can we drive the most value to our business, whatever our goals are? There's been a lot of conversation about ChatGPT and its growth. And you can see here, originally it was openai.com and then switched over to chatgpt.com. And you can see the growth growing since November of last year. It's all the way up to 500 million visits per month. And that seems like a ton. 2.2 billion visits over the course of a year is a lot for most of us. However, compared to Google, it's nothing, right? You see Google has over 17 billion searches per month to 500 million. Now, is ChatGPT or any of these AI searches going to challenge Google anytime soon? Well, Kevin Indig has some projections, seeing that we are seeing some growth month over month. If you extrapolate that and you see exponential growth, then he predicts, in 2 years, you'll see ChatGPT catch up with Google. Now, I'm curious if you all think that that's going to happen. I don't. I do think that AI search in the long run will ultimately take over, whether that's from ChatGPT or Perplexity or Copilot or Google, but I don't think it'll be that fast. And there's a lot of reasons, and we'll get into that. And then finally, you can see the search market over the last 20 years. Google is at the top. All the other search engines are at the bottom. Briefly, we saw like a little dip, indicating, okay, maybe the other search engines are, catching up. But then right at the end, you can see it going up again. So there's nothing definitive. We're talking 90% market share. Now, something as small as 1%, 2% market share for a search engine like Bing is still like billions of dollars, right? There's still a lot of value in just chipping away. But in terms of the what people are using for search, no one's put a dent in Google. And recently, Rand Fishkin of SparkToro, which we'll talk about their platform a lot, did more research looking into how people are searching. And he found that between Google and YouTube, it's still that 90%. And there is search for Bing, there is ChatGPT, 4% from his data, like clickstream data, actually looking into people's devices and where they're going and identifying that. But still, even from his indication, people are still searching on Google. That's not changing. And so what's interesting, because Google continues to be the main search player, we need to continue to try to understand Google, right? We can't just move away from Google. There's a reason that people continue to invest so much money in SEO, in content marketing, in organic content, because that's going to drive the most value, the most revenue, and the most visibility. But Google has been getting a lot better over the years, and it's not as simple as keyword stuffing, which most of you all know. So over the last 12 to 18 months, we've learned a lot about what Google actually cares about. And it's broken down really into 3 pillars. You have relevance, authority, and user behavior. So from the DOJ versus Google antitrust trial, we found out that Google really does use user behavior, you clicking from the search results and going to a website, to inform what should rank higher. They use clicks for rankings, and they use, we learned that from the Google leak, which came out 6 months ago. My boss and Rand Fishkin, so my boss, Mike King, Rand Fishkin, and Abadi Yassini actually found this Google leak that identifies, some semblance of what Google actually uses to create its algorithms. We don't know for sure. We don't know if it's still in use. We don't know which part of it was weighted in different ways, but it gave some insight into how Google ranks. And then we learned about site authority, site quality for in terms of how important it is to have your brand authority for visibility, and then embeddings for relevance. And we'll talk about all of these in greater detail. So based on the Google leak, based on all the documents that we found in the DOJ antitrust trial, Mario Fisher put together this really great article, and he tried to map out all of the different algorithms and systems that are working together and the processes for crawling the internet. So basically, Google goes and looks at all the different documentation, just decides what needs to be indexed and put into this index that Google could then use to determine rankings and serve up to you for each query. So for instance, one thing that was uncovered was this idea of NavBoost, which is one of these systems that uses user behavior. They create click models. What it does is it identifies the likelihood of clicks depending on where the rankings are. And then it has an expected click-through rate based on the search results. If your site doesn't actually generate that click-through rate, then that would have an impact on your rankings, and it can use that to boost or demote different rankings based on the click-through rate compared to these expected click-through models. That's based on the user behavior, which is tied to things like Chrome, where Google gets a lot of its data, because you got to realize when it's looking at billions and billions of clicks over 12 to 18 months, then it has enough data to be able to predict who's going to click and what's going to be valuable and what's going to satisfy the searcher. And so we actually saw proof of this in the Google leaks, which showed some of these different attribute factors around the types of clicks. Remember, it's not just a click, it's whether you're clicking and then you're going back to search results, indicating maybe a bad search result. Whether you're clicking and staying there for a while, indicating that you're getting great information from the search results as well. So it's using all those different types of clicks, not just a click or no click sort of situation. Now, the second pillar talks all about relevance. For those of you who aren't familiar, when we've moved away from keywords and moved towards this idea of semantics, of entities, that every word exists in this can be kind of broken down mathematically. And what this is called is vector embeddings. Every word can have a mathematical value, and then you can plot that on a three-dimensional vector space. And so you can start to see the relationships in 3D between man and woman, walked and walking. And then what Google has done through various different techniques and various different algorithms and models is expand, the words to phrases to full documents. And even in the Google leak, we've identified maybe it's like through full sites. And one of the models, the algorithms that allows you to do this is BERT, which is kind of the transformer that ChatGPT comes from. The T in BERT stands for transformer. So it can really understand language significantly better. It understands where words in a sentence are and understands the context so it can provide better, more relevant results. And why is this important is as an SEO, you can reverse engineer this. It also takes MUM into consideration, which is a newer algorithm model which uses multimodal understanding. So it understands different languages, it understands images, it understands videos, and it understands even more context. So in this example that Google put out, say you put in, I've hiked Mount Adams and want to hike Mount Fuji next fall. What should I do differently to prepare? There's a lot of different considerations for a search engine to understand to provide you with the best information. It's, ideas like the Yoshida Trail is one of the easier routes. Our official climbing season is from July to September. It takes all that information for a much more complex query. And so we actually built a model called OrbitWise, Mike King, our founder, did, which actually allows you to put in a keyword and then put in your domain and examine and now analyze the vector embeddings of the content on that page to give you a content relevance score. So you can know how relevant your page is to the actual keyword that you're targeting. And then you can compare it against the other top 10 pages, or you could actually copy and paste text into this tool and be able to analyze it that way. And so now you have this mathematical approach for content relevance. Now, the third pillar is authority. And we've gotten some insights when we're talking about brands and links that Google really cares about these to determine when we talk about things like EEAT, experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness, the things that matter for why people would actually trust content, because this will all tie into the psychology of how we search and what we search. So there are linked tiers. It understands the value of different links from other authoritative sites and that topical authority, whether your site is about a specific topic. So you should be the ranking that shows up, the result that shows up at the top of the rankings. This actually came up recently with the site reputation abuse issue that Google put out, where sites like Forbes, which is a business site that's ranking for all sorts of things, including CBD gummies, seems outside the realm of its topical authority. And so they actually put into effect manual penalties for sites like Forbes that shouldn't rank for those non-topical queries. And so other people who are more specialized and are more authoritative and have expertise on it will show up. And then another leak, Mark Williams Cook, a founder of Candor, and the tool also asked, identified site quality. So Google actually has a score for your website. It actually can give it this mathematical score, and then we don't know what that means, like what it does with that score, but that might give it the ability to identify whether or not it's valuable for a specific result, maybe that you are a topical authority on, or you're not. Maybe it considers you as more trustworthy, or it doesn't. But there is an actual score determined for your website. Now, once we have all these pillars of what Google is looking for, what makes SEO so complex and where the psychology comes into play is the context of individual searchers. Whenever we go into search, we bring all of our context into the way that we search. For instance, the fact that I'm living in Virginia but grew up in New York, I might, refer to submarine sandwiches, hoagies, a certain way. Or I might, care about the weather in my area, or I might have had a bad day. All these personal individual contexts can influence my searches. And so Google actually uses that context. Now, we've heard a lot about personalization recently. They try to avoid making things too biased. They don't want you to be stuck in what's considered a filter bubble where you're only hearing information that supports your own little contextual world. But it's really easy for that to happen. But it does take context, for instance, your location, your language, the type of device you're using, and related results to inform the results that you get. For instance, if I look for a pizza place near me, it makes a lot of sense for me to actually get one within driving distance as opposed to a pizza place, in California when I'm in Virginia. So, looking on a phone is going to have a different experience than looking on the desktop. And they're also adding more information about the source, which you can see in any search result. When you click on the little three dots next to the result, it'll give you more information about the source and will give you a sense of what Google is using to determine why it served up that result specifically for you. So even though this example is not personalized, it still shows me, okay, well, use these keywords and it's related to a search that appears in the results for films. And other websites, going back to authority, link to this result. It's telling you it cares about the links, and the results seem relevant searches from many regions. So that's how it takes all these contexts and tries to give you this personalized result. But you can actually turn on the ability to give even more personalization based on your search history. That's not always automatically turned on, and they do want to protect you, but you can click on that activity control of the personalized search in the about the source and turn it on or off and give Google that information. Now, when you start to think about that as SEOs, that is going to change the results that people see. Whether you look in a search result in incognito or based on a certain location, you're going to see slightly nuanced different results based on someone else in a different location with a different search history. Is it dramatic? For some queries, yes, it is, like local. For others, it's going to be more nuanced. And so, in a podcast episode, actually about four or 5 months ago, Elizabeth Tucker, the director of product management at Google Search, went on with John Mueller and Lizzie Sassman and talked about the biases in Google that they're trying to avoid. This is word for word. She said, there are numerous biases we're mindful of when users seek information. Now, let's acknowledge the fact that Google is a really hard job, right? For billions of new searches every day, how are they supposed to make unbiased search results? It's impossible. It's never going to happen. But they're trying to not necessarily disproportionately favor certain types of websites like encyclopedic versus evergreen content, or bigger brands versus smaller blogs, or including voices from social media. Their goal is to have a diverse mix where they can surface high quality content in all its form, sizes, modest goals indeed, but it doesn't always work like that. They're trying, but they're not always great at it. In fact, I highly recommend the amount of effort that they go into this by watching this documentary that Google put out in 2020 called Trillions of Questions, No Easy Answers. They actually interviewed all of the top people, all the top names involved in Google search, and discussed how they go and roll out new features and new algorithm updates for search. It's a complex process and they get it wrong a lot of times, but they're very rigorous in their testing and they still get it wrong. You can see they sit in this word room where they, show the results and they see, is it exactly what we're looking for? Do the quality raters, the people who are assessing whether or not Google's getting it right, think that searches are satisfied? But like I said, Google bias still appears in the search. You can see it, and people also ask, if I, search for General Mills, we're going to see this. Is General Mills owned by China? Where's that coming from? Abercrombie and Fitch. What is the Abercrombie and Fitch scandal? When we talk about reputation management, a lot of it is based on what is online and all these other factors, and it gets surfaced. But your, search will have these biased, people also ask, or even autocomplete. If you've ever auto-completed anything, yes, it's based on a lot of what other people are searching, but other people are biased as well. So that really makes things hard on SEOs when people, it's trying to make things easy, for people, for searchers, but it's pointing you in a certain direction that you may or may not want your audience to go in. So now, with all that said, I want to tap into the psychology in search and some of the different biases and effects that exist and how we should think about it when as SEOs. So there are hundreds of cognitive biases at play. And it comes down to the searches we make and the results we choose. In terms of this equation, you search in something that's going to be biased by your own personal context. You get results that are biased by Google, and then your bias comes into play again by choosing the result, whether it's at the top or the middle or based on a brand, based on your own bias as well, right? That's why we focus on, you know, meta titles, so that when our titles show up, that we can convince someone to click on us. And a lot of psychology comes into play with that. Because ultimately, SEO is part of this Venn diagram where it's both in marketing and in psychology. And so the role bias plays in search is, first off, cognitive efficiency. And what that means is our brains are lazy. I'm going to get into that. But honestly, our brains will take shortcuts all the time. And so as SEOs, as content marketers, we need to create stuff that's going to continue to make things easy for our searchers. Belief consistency. We actually avoid information that challenges what we already believe. People don't like to be proven wrong. People like to be proven right. And we're going to talk about how those biases emerge. And then identity reinforcement. Throughout our entire life, we create these identities for ourselves, the way that we see ourselves, both privately and publicly. And all of our searches and the way that we find information and consume information serves those identities. So, book I highly recommend, Thinking Fast and Slow by behavioral economist and psychologist Daniel Kahneman. Talks about this idea of two brains, system one and system two. Your brain can turn on system one when it's for really easy decisions, you know, just like how you're just driving down the road and you don't have to think about everything. You're able to just drive and not worry, care in the world. But then imagine that all of a sudden you're talking to a friend, right? All of a sudden you have a car coming at you the other way and you have to change lanes. All of a sudden you're going to stop talking to your friend because your brain has to do a lot more work. This is system two. System one tends to be more emotional. It just goes on impulse, where system two requires a lot of logic. It's taxing on the brain. We like system one. It leads to cognitive ease, where things are easier to do when you're in a good situation, when you're happy, when you don't have to overthink things. Lawrence is a fantastic book where you don't have to overthink things. That means the whole process of selecting things in search, it feels effortless. It feels good. It feels familiar. And so to play into that cognitive ease is this idea of status quo bias, which was the whole foundation for the DOJ versus Google antitrust trials argument. So status quo bias is the tendency for people to stick with the preset options simply because it's easier than making a change. So for those of you who here uses Google search, do you use Google for all of your searches, or do you actually use Bing? Do you use DuckDuckGo? Do you use Yahoo or AOL? Very curious in the chat if you want to let me know what you use, because the whole argument here is ecosystems like your Apple iPhone, an Android phone, Firefox browser, they all default to Google. Now, people make the argument that Google is just a better product, but the status quo bias speaks to this idea that regardless, you are going to use the default search engine that's put in front of you. You're not going to go through the process. So Molly uses Chrome, for instance. Typically you're going to use Google. And they highlighted in the actual DOJ that to change the search engine default is a lot of freaking work that most people won't do. People like us, SEOs and marketers, they don't actually take the time to switch things up. For all of us, we just use what's in front of us unless someone actually says, here's how you do it and does it for them, or they just happen to be that type of person, cognitive bias context, where they're going to go in and make those changes and customize because they prefer things done the way that they want. But to change a search engine default, you got to be aware that there is one in the first place. Like Apple defaults to Safari. I know that I actually go and use Chrome like Molly anyway. Like, even though I have an iPhone, I hate Safari. I go to use Chrome, but most people will just use whatever's the default. They have to go and discover alternatives, try different things out that they may or may not like we're doing with ChatGPT right now. They need to learn the steps necessary to change or evade the default. So if I go to Chrome, I have to figure out how to actually make it so, Yahoo or Bing is my default search engine. ChatGPT has been adding features that make it easier for you to do that, and then implement the steps. And in the trial, the reason they prove that Google has this monopoly based on the status quo bias is it takes 10 steps for you to remove the search widget from Android. They have it all over the place. People aren't going to do it. Now, you might make the argument that, if the product is better, then people will make the change. And that's pretty accurate. You think about with maps, despite Google Maps being or Apple Maps being the default on iPhone, most people will actually use Google Maps instead. I know I do. Yeah, exactly. So I want to move on to the next bias. So you've got your default, you're probably using Google. That's why it has such a massive market share. It has deals with all of these different, hardware providers and software providers like browsers and whatnot. But what about what we search? Where are the biases there? Now, if I put into Google, why are dogs better pets than cats? Not surprisingly, it's going to give me results that reinforce that belief, that reinforce that query. Why are dogs better than cats? You'll see an entire, sources across the web. Dogs are trainable. Dogs are loyal. Guide dogs. There are all these reasons that dogs are better than cats. But when I change up my query, why are cats better pets than dogs? You see the complete opposite. So you can't necessarily come away from this thinking, oh, dogs are definitively better, cats are definitively better. And there's so many different types of searches that are based on opinion, not based on fact. What is Google's responsibility to give you the balanced responses versus exactly what you're looking for? And so for a lot of these queries, that's where confirmation bias comes into play. The tendency to favor information that confirms one existing belief or hypotheses. And it happens over and over. And you're going to start being aware of it now as you start to search, whether your own searches are kind of leading Google towards a certain type of result. There was a very fascinating study by Kahan done in 2015, where they asked people to search for the relationship between coffee and hypertension. And through their searches, they found that there was a relationship. Then they went and searched for coffee is not cause hypertension. And they found results that supported that. And then they found a third version, which is this idea. So you have your bias search, coffee causes hypertension. Then you have your unbiased search, coffee does not cause hypertension. And then you have this dissimilar opposition, which is this idea of if I change the words, because you think it all is tied to keywords, coffee does not cause hypertension. You change up the words, you'll get a different result. And so this is framed in the way that we think about our searches. You frame the problem, you have a certain amount of familiarity, you put your search query in, then you get Google to give you the search context with the results, the personalization, then you choose the result and you interpret it differently and you make your decision. So confirmation bias starts from the get-go of the search. So in my example, when I'm talking about bias search, similar term opposition, dissimilar term opposition, you can see how the results in the featured snippet are slightly different. Does recycling benefit the environment? Gives you a different featured snippet than recycling doesn't benefit the environment. See how it's same, but it just has a negative there, but that changes the result. And then if I change the words completely in dissimilar term opposition, does recycling harm the environment? You see completely different results as well. So as content marketers, this is where we really need to start thinking about our audience and the way that they're searching and the biases that they're putting into their search queries to determine the content that we need to create to show up in these different types of searches. So another example, say you're trying to target a topic like saving for retirement. Neutral would be retirement saving strategy, just generally asking for them. A bias would be like, why is a Roth IRA best for retirement savings? Now, that example of similar term opposition would be, why is a Roth IRA not effective for retirement savings? And then the dissimilar is when we put in the employer-sponsored 401k. And you can start doing this process for all of your keywords. Same thing with keto diet, keto diet basics, keto diet for effective weight loss, keto diet not effective for weight loss, keto diet versus low fat for weight loss, the dissimilar term opposition. And so then when you want to start to think about your topic focus, you want to segment and build out your topic clusters with and without the biased intent. Take your unbiased topic, put in your biased keywords, address your similar term opposition, your dissimilar term opposition, and identify whether the content supports that so you show up. So you can take your existing topic clusters and add that brand and audience bias. For instance, organic gardening. Organic gardening produces healthier, more nutritious produce compared to conventional gardening methods. So in all these different types of biased keywords and topics around gardening, you can put in your own opinion and your brand's opinion to make sure that you show up regardless of the type of audience. And you can build a whole framework out of this, right? Does your brand have a potential bias, right? If they do, lean into it and make sure that you're including your content, your opinions in that. If it's mild bias, maybe you do need to approach different sides. Another example, are electric cars dangerous? So what's interesting here is you wouldn't think that Kia, who creates electric cars, would create content for this. You have all these governmental agencies who are putting in, who have created content, but Kia has addressed this topic, which is biased, assuming that electric cars are dangerous, and then created content that addresses why it's not, but has that biased sort of framing in the actual content, and then they are surfaced. And if you go back, you don't see any other brands, any other electric car brands in these search results. So anyone who's considering an electric car but might be thinking that it's dangerous, they're going to see Kia as their entry point into that market. And so I actually built out a ChatGPT, a custom GPT that you can use to analyze your keyword list and whether or not they contain cognitive bias. You can use a QR code. Like I said, I'll include the link in the deck that we'll give after the fact, but this is really cool. What you put in here is you can either use it to put in a list of keywords and have it generate biased keywords. Now, this isn't tied to search volume. This is more just kind of a general, ideation of keywords, and you can always check these in your favorite search volume tool. But it's a great way to think about the different ways that your audience is potentially thinking about these keywords from a bias perspective. Next bias, position bias. And this is why we all actually fight to rank #1 in SEO on Google, is there's a tendency of users to interact with items on top of a list with higher probability than with items at a lower position in the list, regardless of the item's actual relevance. So you can see here naturally, and this is why it's so controversial with feature snippets and now AI overviews, that they're right at the top along with ads, is people are so much more likely to interact with those at the top than going further down. Now, there are going to be situations, yes, where people go to page 2. If you're not satisfied, if the results really don't resonate with you, like you'll keep looking for it, but most people are going to stay on the top 1, 2, 3 results. And you see that through click-through rates. The click-through rate typically for result #1 is going to be exponentially larger than 1, and it goes down further and further. And what was interesting, Systrix actually did a study recently. This is UK searchers, but when you add AI overviews, you see the click-through rate drop significantly. And that makes sense because when you add whatever it is in position 1 above all the other results due to that position bias, you're going to see less of a click-through rate. And so what's interesting too, just from Google's perspective, whether you trust their data or not, both Sundar Pichai and Liz Reed, the head of Google Search, have come out and said that they found that AI overviews, people use search more and are more satisfied with the results. And as Daniel points out, this absolutely can account for why rankings might be up, but traffic is down. It's something that we've been paying attention to at iPullRank for the longest time. We actually have a threat report of AI overviews to see, before it came out, how much we predict you would lose in traffic when there were AI overviews. Now everyone can do that through other tools like advanced web ranking or Ahrefs or SEMrush. They all actually track, or Authoritas, they actually all track AI overviews and the impact to your traffic. The framing effect. So going back to those titles, like even if you are showing up for what you're ranking for, the way that your title is framed can influence the way the information, the way that people decide to click on it. So framing effect is people's decisions and judgments are influenced by the way information is presented rather than just the content itself. So when we look at something like, is that keto diet healthy? You can see the way these titles are framed differently. I got you, buddy. Is the keto diet healthy? Weighing the risks. That's one kind of result that you're looking for based on the risks. How to make the keto diet healthy? That's more of a positive. That's like, oh, I want the keto diet to be healthy. So I'm going to click on this link that's framed in a way to show me that it's going to be healthy. Now, if you go to that video, keto kills, cardiologist reveals ketogenic diet risks in science. Well, if I want to confirm that keto is unhealthy, I'm more likely to click on that video that's framing it in a way that it's bad. And then at the bottom, we see from the National Institute of Health, the potential health benefits of the ketogenic diet. So here we go. We see it framed as a positive. So the way that it's framed and your own, the framing effect is going to influence your own confirmation bias, and people are more likely to click on what's going to, serve their search intent and what they initially believe in the first place. Another example, and we see Reddit forums showing up. But what's interesting is you see all of the different titles of the threads that show up in Reddit for a category, going back to that should I buy an electric car idea. So are electric cars actually worth it? Negative. Should I get an electric car? Actually neutral. Is it worth buying an electric car? Negative. What is the best electric car you can buy? Positive. It's all based on the framing. Next one, familiarity heuristic. So this is that the familiar is favored over novel places, people, or things. And this is very much tied into this idea of the importance of brand and visibility. They actually did a study in 2013 where they put people in an MRI and showed them Coke and Pepsi brand logos. And people chose, their brain actually lit up so much more for Coke than for Pepsi. So, in terms of the way your brain works, there's so much more visibility of the brand that it actually impacts your familiarity and how much you like that brand. And so when you're looking at search results, you see, the favicons come up there. That's going to influence whatever your familiarity bias is, whatever you're already biased towards in terms of these brands that you want to click on, you're more likely to click on them. Authority bias is another big one that comes up over and over and over again. That's this tendency to attribute greater accuracy to the opinion of an authority figure and be more influenced by that opinion. Now, remember, like back in the day, for those of you who are, millennials or Gen X or boomers, the whole food pyramid, back in the day, it was this idea of, the fat's on top, the bread on the bottom. You should mostly eat bread and then have some veggies and have very little fat. But that was nutritionally wrong, but it was coming from the government. And so that's ingrained in our brains. That's the authority that really made us trust that. Think about NASA told us that Pluto was a planet. And then, years later, apparently it's not a planet, but we always believe what the authorities say. Now, so authority matters, as I, addressed earlier, and people care about it. And so you're more likely to trust what's considered expertise, what's considered, the most well-known brand. And as a result, you can use this Moz tool to check your own brand authority. They came up with this. Now, remember, it's a proprietary metric. This isn't something that Google uses. This isn't their site score. But you can use that to get your own score, to get a sense of how you need to improve your brand and how it looks compared to other brands as well. And this is part of, you can do the free test, but it's also baked into Moz Pro. Moz is adding some really cool and valuable features. And so you can see how this ultimately helps, going back to the user behavior, is if your brand is recognizable, it's familiar, people are more likely to click through to it. And if people are more likely to click through to it, that improves those user behavior metrics, which leads to higher rankings, which leads to more people linking back to you, because people are more likely to provide backlinks to the top results in the rankings, which leads to more brand familiarity, which kind of ties into the strategy around why brand has become so important in the eyes of Google and for marketers. As well, part of that is getting the listicles, that visibility. If you see any product that has like lists of any publisher that has lists of products, you want to make sure that you're in there, both for the backlinks, also for the visibility, also for the brand familiarity, which leads to the halo effect. Another component of that is we tend to, for positive impressions of a person, company, country, brand, or product in one area to positively influence one's opinions or feelings. So whenever you see different relationships between partnerships like Lego and, Harry Potter, or Lego and Marvel, all these different brand partnerships or showing up in those listicles, if you appreciate the publisher or one of the brands, your brand gets a benefit from being associated with it. That's a very proven study from Thorndike. So this brand bias framework plays into this idea of, what you can do is leverage colleague insights and relationships. So get more digital PR placements, coordinate with your campaign messaging with branded LPs, invest in visual content so you're more visible on the SERPs, and partner with these likable brands for the halo effect. Ultimately, grow your visibility across all channels. Example is Mattel back, last summer or 2 summers ago when they had their whole Barbie come out, Barbie movie, they did all sorts of brand partnerships, and you can see in Google Trends how the search for Mattel spiked. So this is another big one that's tied back to the beginning of this webinar, talking about generalizations and this idea of in-group bias, that the tendency for individuals to favor, support, or show preference toward members of their own group over those in the outgroups. Hopefully I'm not going to go over. I still have a lot to get through, folks. So feel free to bear with me. If I don't get to all of it, like I said, I'll get you the recording back. Are you guys enjoying this? Is this all helpful information, the psychology of search and SEO? Everyone's following along? Anyway, diving back into in-group bias. So people identify with groups based on political identity, cultural background, gender, age, ethnicity, nationality, team affiliation, even their religion. And what's interesting is, with all these psychological studies, they do tend to use the same types of groups. Not all of them, but there's this book written by Joseph Heinrich where he pointed out the weirdest people in the world. And that's the fact that we are so influenced by Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic communities and nations. And when you think about Google, despite it being all over the world to hundreds of different countries and different languages, it is still very much influenced by the weird content, the weird users, the people who use it the most, who have access to these tools and who produce the content. Typically comes from majority, it's changing, but from the majority from weird nations. What's problematic about this is that weird communities, weird demographics are actually complete outliers compared to the rest of the world, but use insignificant psychological research. So it goes back to this idea of you have to look for generalizations and then see through the generalizations, right? We have to accept the fact that whether or not we ascribe by the stereotypes, they exist, right? And it's messed up and it's not fair. But for marketers who want to appeal to the largest audience possible, you are going to create that boring, generalized content to avoid alienating any folks who, wouldn't find themselves as part of this in-group bias. If you're only talking to a specific persona, you are going to appeal to that persona, but you might alienate other personas. So as we create our content, as we create our brand, that is the major consideration in our content strategy. Think about cultural and geographical bias. And I mentioned this earlier, the way that we use, language and linguistics and refer to things, in this country, everyone refers to subs. I refer to hoagies, which are, basically just in Pennsylvania. Same thing with soda, the way that some people refer to all sodas as sodas or Coke or pops or soft drinks. The way we use our words has a cultural or geographical bias. There's a media bias, right? Like regardless of how you feel, whatever side you're leaning on, whenever you're searching for something related to news, people are going to click into whatever, publisher that they align with their in-group politically, economically, their age group. It's interesting. There's actually a super useful website that tries to at least make you aware of the biases that show up in search, called Ground News. And so what it does is you can search for, a specific news topic, or there's a Chrome extension that can go on Google, and it'll identify whether the publication is left-leaning, right-leaning, or central. And you start to learn a lot about the type of results that you see in the bias that is implicitly part of the content that they're creating. But you can't avoid it. There's always going to be these bias in the results, and Google's trying its best to create as diverse voices as you can. And I think that's important. I think it's valuable to at least hear the perspectives of different groups, right? You become a better, more well-rounded person, and you can understand people better the more different type of people you talk to. You could put yourself in a certain type of bubble and lock yourself in, but then you're only going to think based on that information and the people you interact with and the publications you interact with. It is kind of on Google to try to keep us as diverse as possible. Now, what this all ties into is the way that we search. We are so used to this idea of the marketing funnel. You start at the top, through learning about something, and then you become familiar with the topic, and then you start considering your different options, and then ultimately you make a decision. Well, in 2020, Google actually produced a study. Yes, it's Google, but Rennie and Prothero identified this idea of the messy middle, where the search isn't linear. It goes all over. It doesn't go down. It doesn't go to the side. It goes back and forth. You explore, and then you evaluate, and then you explore more, and then you evaluate. And that's all triggered by some reason for you to go and search in the first place. And then ultimately you either stop and don't purchase anything, or you make a purchase. And in their study, what you can see is the way that biases inform your audience, right? At first, they're coming to their search with their own uninformed familiarity and in-group bias, right? Their self-identity, what their friends and families recommend, the popular brands that they like. And then as they go through this exploration evaluation, they start to see competitor brands. They start to see product details. They start to see expert reviews, which are informed by another type of bias, information and authority bias. And so bias is always kind of changing the way we perceive things one way or the other. In the study, they found ways that you could actually influence decision-making through these other 6 biases that had the most influence on purchase decisions. Category heuristics, which is basically information bias, providing as much information as you can about the product. The power of now, a certain urgency that you have to do it. Social proof, those star ratings, that if everyone else is liking it, then I will too. Scarcity bias, that there's not enough left, that you have to get it before it's gone. There's only 1 or 2 left in stock. Authority bias, that a actual expert says that it's good. Or the power of free, like free shipping. We're so much more likely to select a product if we get something free with it. And what they did in the study was they actually tested this, one brand against another, and they added the biases to one brand. And they found that as you add these biases, more and more people will select the other brand. When they added all 6, it was a significant difference, where brand didn't have an impact as much as all of these other factors. And to solidify that it had nothing to do with brand in the first place, they actually made up fictional brands and still saw similar results. So while you do see affinity for specific brands, you can offset that with all of these other different psychological techniques and tactics. And then finally, I added one because I want to talk next about AI. I know Molly mentioned this earlier, and this is something that I think is the future of search and really important, is AI search. And so I was looking it up. I've been reading all about it. I couldn't find anything that really speaks to this idea of conversational search bias. And so this is, as we use ChatGPT and we're using it for search, or as Google gets more and more complex and can understand us better, we don't need to really depend on one simple search keyword. We can use entire questions and sentences and paragraphs and what came before and what came after. As that expands, there's going to be a tendency for people to infuse their own biased context and identities into conversations with AI search bots, resulting in compounded bias results. So we're only going to see more bias going forward. And I'm making this a thing. I'm making fetch happen. Conversational search bias. You heard it here first. As people use AI search engines, they're going to see even more personalized and biased results that support what they want, which is ultimately a combination of all the different biases that we already covered. And why is it longer queries reveal bias? Well, there are more assumptions. Longer queries often include assumptions about the outcomes, causations, or the framings, revealing the searcher's pre-existing viewpoint. It's less open-ended, right? Specifically, phrasing reduces openness to diverse perspectives. It's funneling results towards those that align with your own implied longer narrative. And then finally, contextualized language. The more language you use, the more modifiers you're going to use to make it more narrow and ultimately make it exactly what you're looking for. In this example, like, with proven benefits or safe for kids, as I mentioned, right? Like, as you're looking for that in your searches, that's going to influence the results. And so as you say, I want running shoes for a 40-something-year-old guy so he can keep up with his daughter, play basketball, and walk the dog, all that has so much more context into it that's going to influence the results. Bias in this case isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it just shows that you are going to influence the results by everything that you say. So AI in modern search, if you've been paying attention, we've been seeing all sorts of different ways that Google is infusing AI into the search, obviously. Okay, it looks like this GIF isn't working, but first off, we have AI overviews, which comes up at the top. It's pulling from all different types of search queries. I'll talk a little bit about that. AI organized Google Shopping. So if you go to shopping right now, there's a completely updated version of search results for products where it's actually identifying subtopics for you. It's organized based on products, on the merchant feed, like all the information, the structured data that's both on your website and in your advertisement Google merchant feed, as well as like reviews and a whole other different factors, and the shopping graph, the way where Google is collecting all this information about your shopping. They've done it with local search. You see the links here, but they're rolling this out. It's mostly on phone and based on where you are. But say you're looking in this example of anniversary celebration dinner for places in Dallas, it goes and gives you different kind of carousels and topics based on places to eat, things to do. It's a more comprehensive search that's not just all the search results answering that same question. It's more organized and more interactive and more helpful. Same with recipes. I'm really hating that these, I almost want to go to like the websites where these come up, but that it's pulling together all the different recipes and examples in a more AI organized way, like how to make it, what do you need, different versions. And then most recently, they released this tool, which I think is mostly intentionally supposed to be educational, learn about, where you can learn about a subject. But I think this will ultimately replace AI overviews and informational search. It's multimodal. It gives you sections and topics, and it's generative AI, and it pulls it all together with images and links and videos. It's a completely comprehensive answer to a question that's much better than what we're seeing just from generative AI overviews and outgoing links. And so AI-powered search expands results beyond exact match and related queries through the following methods. It takes that contextual understanding, personalization, semantic matching, entity recognition, generative answers, multimodal integration, dynamic query expansion, and conversational continuity. Those are a lot of big words, but basically says it's trying to take all the different information, all the context, all its understanding of people, places, and things, all the context of what you're writing, and producing a much more complex, integrative answer that'll serve you better than you even understand. Shout out to Rich Sanger and actually Lawrence O'Toole, who's here of Authoritas, who have been doing a bunch of studies showing that when you go into AI overviews, it's not pulling results just from what you're searching for. It's identifying related queries. It's identifying synonyms and reformulations. It's identifying the entire search journey and taking all that information and bringing it into the generative AI. So when we're trying to target AI overviews, it isn't just about answering the specific query. It's answering everything and in between. So you need to stop thinking about keywords in the sense of individual keywords, and you really need to start to think about topics. When you look about how to optimize for AI overviews, there are ways, there's a big focus on the relevance that I mentioned earlier in the way that it takes these words and it breaks them down into mathematical values and ultimately entire passages. That's what AI overviews is pulling from. It's looking through all these different documents based on their query and saying, okay, does this passage have the relevant mathematical value to what the person is searching for? I went into this process in depth in an article about a year ago, and still super relevant, about how you can optimize for Google's AI overviews, including using this tool, Market Brew. Now, one last thing before I get into ChatGPT, because I do think it's super relevant. I realize we're at time. I'm probably going to go another like 15, 20 minutes. So if you have to leave, thank you for sticking with me. This is a lot of fun. So Google versus ChatGPT, major considerations when you're trying to rank in these two different platforms. Google uses its own index, right? Google has its own processes that goes throughout the web, identifies what's worth actually rendering and indexing that can be used in its gigantic library to be pulled for its AI overviews. ChatGPT uses Bing's index. Now, there's going to be significant overlap. However, it's not going to be identical. So you need to pay attention to whether your content is showing up in Bing, whether it's indexed in Bing using Webmaster Tools, in order to show up in ChatGPT outputs, as well as Perplexity and Copilot, all these other AI search tools. The other consideration is ranking factors are not going to be the same. Google has its whole algorithms, right? It has all of its ranking factors. ChatGPT is even more of a black box than Google. We don't know with the Search GPT version of ChatGPT whether it's using everything from Bing and how it ranks what it's going to show, or if it's using its own parameters, its own ranking factors, its own considerations of content relevance. Now, it's tempting to think that it is Bing, but nobody knows definitively how it's choosing what appears in ChatGPT. So what do? How do we deal with this as a content marketer, as an SEO? Well, the big thing is audience research, right? When it comes to your product, your website, your information, your brand, your services, you're going to have people who have no idea who you are and they have no opinion. You have people who really dislike your brand, and then you have people who really like your brand. Now, going back to the beginning, you only have a certain amount of resources that you can use. So that's why you want to focus on this section. The people who have no idea who you are or have no opinion, people who like your brand. It's not worth it to spend time trying to convince people from those in-groups that don't fit into your targeted in-groups and try to attract them to your product. It's not the best resource. Maybe in years down the line, as you become the biggest in the world and you become the next Amazon, you can try to appeal to everyone. But if you are not Amazon, then you really should be focusing on who your in-groups are. Who are the people and what are their identities that will ultimately choose your service, your product, your brand? And to do that, you need to do audience research. Tommy Walker put together a really fascinating report called the State of Discontent Report, in where he was asking content marketers how they feel about content. It's funny, I love this report. And at the same time, I think it's incredibly biased. The whole concept around the state of discontent implies that content marketers are not happy with their content marketing teams or the work they're doing or the resources that they have. But what he did find is that people aren't doing nearly enough audience research, which is a big deal in the grand scheme of things. So how can you do audience research? Well, two tools that I highly recommend. SparkToro, which I'll go into a little more in depth. They tell you all sorts of information about your demographics, the sites they go to, the podcasts they listen to, the social media platforms that they spend their time on. And Glimpse. Glimpse is a great for interviews, because if you see, actually, if you go back to the state of content discontent report, the different ways that people actually do research is through, their website analytics, customer interviews, social media analytics, social monitoring, surveys, market research reports, tools like SparkToro, focus groups, and other. So Glimpse is actually one of those interview tools, which is really cool. It allows you to either interview your existing customers by putting together like a range of different questions that you can either do yourself or use AI. And they have actual audiences that you can target by affinity groups. Another example of doing this type of user testing research is like Winter for B2B, WYNTER. But what you can do with SparkToro is you can look at all of these demographics and start to identify how your target audience actually interacts with the internet on these different platforms. What are their in groups? What do they care about? And that can influence your strategy. So for instance, if you're doing your keyword research, I use SEMrush and SimilarWeb to look at, so we're using in this example, a toy brand, Melissa and Doug. What are they ranking for? How do they compare to these other major toy brand domains? What are they ranking for various keywords and topics? Oh no, I ran out. Okay, I'm going to switch over to everyone. Thank you everyone for bearing with me. It looks like my presentation ended at like 100 slides. So I'm going to go and dive into this one. Y'all still with me? I'm 105 in, and now I'm going to get into some of the really fun stuff, which is Profound, which is the way that we are going to monitor and track ChatGPT. So let me get down to that section where I was and present. Okay. Yep. Okay. Thanks, folks. Let me add. Hey, Gilberto. Oh, everyone chime in. Tell me how y'all are doing. Okay. Gonna let this go. Okay. There we go. Okay. Can you guys see? Are we good? Are we back? Okay. Awesome. So for the audience research, so one of the new features, which I think is really interesting, because to my point about the way that people search, the conversation search bias, people are going to start using longer and longer search queries in things like ChatGPT and ultimately in Google. And so we need to stop thinking about individual keywords, and we need to start thinking about topics, right? Because we're not going to be able to track that one giant, 20 word paragraph that you're searching for. It's only going to be one time. It's not going to be repeatable. So what you want to do is start to think in more of a topical mentality. And so how can we identify these topics? Well, SparkToro allows you to put in your target audience, and then based on all the websites that they go to, it generates a list of topics. So what I did for this workflow is I took this list of topics from SparkToro, and I went to this new tool called Profound. Now, for those of you who are wondering about ChatGPT and how you're going to track your brand mentions in ChatGPT, this has been the best tool that I found. Profound, and transparently, they've given me access. This isn't paid, but they've given me access to the account for free, and I ran this experiment with them, where what they do is they'll take this list of topics and they can basically track ChatGPT search, Perplexity, Copilot, Gemini, you name it, any of these AI LLMs. And you give them these topics and they start to generate prompts, right? They generate hundreds of prompts for each topic to identify the variations and start to see what ChatGPT and these AI search bots are providing for the brands in response. And then it can tell you which brands are showing up top, second, third, fourth, or not at all. And this is going to be really important as we start to focus on ChatGPT as a marketing channel, because it still goes to Bing's index. It's not static like it was a year and a half ago, but it's really important to pay attention. So when we do this topic research, I can start to see some really interesting insights from the 15 different topics that I gave to them. For instance, this Melissa and Doug brand, which is a wooden toy brand that competes with Lego and Fisher Price and whatnot, it has a visibility percentage of 94% based on the audience that I found in SparkToro who are searching for things around toys. Its share of voice is 18%, and you can see the fluctuation, which is even more important and valuable as we get closer to Black Friday. Because believe it or not, people are using ChatGPT for their Black Friday shopping, even though it's far from perfect. And I guarantee you, this time next year, so many more people are going to be using it. Well, whether it's everybody or not, I don't think. And then, so what you can then start to look at is across these different models and across these different topics, what is the industry visibility? So for instance, I can see that my Melissa and Doug brand has the best visibility in ChatGPT 4.0 and ChatGPT 4.0 mini, but it's not as good, still the better than all the other brands, but not as good in Perplexity and Microsoft Copilot. Right? So you can start to imagine how valuable this would be for any e-commerce brand or any media publisher to track how they're performing for their focused topics in ChatGPT and these other LLMs. And then another feature that it shows that's really cool is it addresses the specific citations that show up that mention the brand. So for instance, for toys, in a Black Friday search on ChatGPT for toys, there is this, you see that P icon? There's a link to a parenting.com website that lists out Melissa and Doug. So you can start to see the citations and the media publishers, going back to what I was saying about the partnerships and the familiarity, where these brands are showing up that's influencing ChatGPT's output. So even if it's not your brand that's showing up in the results, you can start to see the links, the articles that are being written, and what you can target to get into to be more likely to show up for a seasonal holiday like Black Friday. So Rudiger, this is all graphs made by Profound. Try profound.com. And then they actually provide insights. So this is like a beta feature that they're working on, but it's really cool. So taking into consideration the visibility on the topics and all the citations, it starts to give you recommendations of the types of websites that you want to show up in order to appear in ChatGPT. So I think this is going to be the future of search, of AI search. I think Google will eventually continue to evolve the search results so we won't see 10 links. I think ultimately informational search isn't going to be AI overviews. It's going to be a fully AI organized search. That's a combination of generative text summarizing things, links to different content and publishers and brands, visuals, videos, images. So the whole search is a more satisfying experience. Whether or not ChatGPT goes more multimodal like that, in terms of the way that the whole UI, the user interface, is designed, is to be seen, but it feels inevitable that that would be a better way to interact with these AI search bots. I did talk to their team, and Jay Wong, the product lead at Profound, had some really interesting anecdotal AI search insights. They are looking into adding things like search volume for ChatGPT, which is fascinating, and I'm very curious to see their methodology. But anecdotally, he says that people put a lot of trust in AI already. We hear all of these examples of people who are anti-AI, but who do use it are providing elaborate details in their prompts and ask AI for help with very important decisions. He's found that people are making high purchase intent queries in AI, although the ability to purchase with AI is still new, meaning purchases may still go through Google. We actually just heard that it was announced that Perplexity allows you now to buy products directly in Perplexity. And I imagine that's absolutely something Google will do in the near future, is giving you the ability to bypass all the different marketplaces and just purchase directly in the SERPs. Whether that will run into more monopoly issues from the DOJ or from the EU is to be seen, but I feel like that is inevitable, and why Google will actually become a more important channel to appear in. AI really likes mentioning brand names, which I think is really interesting and benefits brands, agnostic of what the user prompt means. And I think any of us who have used ChatGPT have experienced this, is like sometimes it really points you in different directions in terms of, what it wants to tell you. And so as AI usage grows, some brands will have a big marketing head start if they're already showing up in the ChatGPT or the various AI chatbot outputs. So now's the best, easiest time to become one of those brands because the competition is the sparsest. And then many of the SEO strategies used to take action to rank better can also have an impact for AIO, but it'll evolve as the newer version of the internet designed for AI agents emerges. And I agree with Jay on a lot of this. Ultimately, that AI will change, our user behavior will change. Like as Google adopts a lot of these AI searches, the way that we search, either in question form or using natural language conversation, is going to be more of the default than what we were used to for a lot of us growing up, where we just put in the keyword trying to manipulate Google to give us a result that it actually understands what we're trying to say, because that was the limitation of the time. And in essence, Google trained us to search in keywords. Whereas now that Google and these AI search bots are so much more sophisticated in understanding natural language, user behavior will change. And maybe that's something to consider with your demographics. People who are either more used to these types of searches, these types of technologies, or younger demographics that are used to using it are already searching with natural language. And so that's going to make things really tricky for us to track rankings and performance as SEO. But that doesn't mean that we can't or that we should stop, which leads me to the last part. Shout out to Mark Traffigan and Mark Alves, shared this on LinkedIn recently. But to start tracking your AI search traffic in Google Analytics 4, GA4, what you can do is you can actually set up these custom reports that identify traffic acquisition and then create a regex formula, which a regex basically identifies whether a word appears in the URL, because for ChatGPT and Perplexity, they currently append some parameters in their URLs as well, and it's coming from those websites. So okay, if I get a conversion or if I get a visit, it's actually coming from AI search. Hopefully Google will add that at some point in the context of AI overviews, but it really hasn't happened yet. So finally, we made it to the end, only 15, 20 minutes over, and I'm happy to take some questions after, but cognitive biases shape your audience's behavior. What can you do? Identify the biases of your audience and yourself, flesh them out in your audience research, talk to your customers, understand what they're searching for. Think about the different segments. Yes, you don't want that persona that is so specific that it only applies to one person, but you don't want to go so general where you're trying to talk to everybody. So identify those in groups, those different identities, address the generalizations, but also see through the generalizations as you build out your content. Lean into your opinions. Biases exist. People search with biases. AI search bots and Google are going to serve up those biased opinions for the confirmation bias. So showcase your expertise and include your opinions. Think of topics and subtopics. Don't over-index on keywords. Don't think only in terms of keywords. Think in broader topics and build your brand, leverage your brand in terms of cognitive psychology and familiarity bias, the visibility of your brand, the likability of your brand matters in terms of how likely you are to show up in these results across the board. That's it. That's it. I think I covered everything. It's fun. There was just so much as I was putting this together that I wanted to cover in this presentation. Hopefully it was helpful. I'm happy to take any questions now. I see that there are a few in here. Rudiger, thank you so much for participating, and Daniel, as well as early on, Molly was saying Google will learn how to utilize AI and improve their search experience so that it will outperform ChatGPT. Agreed. ChatGPT user experience is going to have to get better before it can outperform Google. Molly, 100% agree with that. So much of it depends on whether governments will kind of halt or stall Google because there's so much more money and so much more of a head start that other competitors, including OpenAI, will struggle to compete and innovate in resources. However, personally, I don't think Google is going anywhere until it goes anywhere. Going back to the default bias, like until ChatGPT is, a part of a search default as part of your Apple iPhone and Apple Intelligence or whatever, different apps that you're using, or people start using it more, it's going to be hard for it to challenge Google. Rudiger asked, what is my opinion on the topic entity relationship? Basically a TF IDF, but for topic entities. 100% Rudiger, it is critical to understand your entity the way that Google understands your brand or your business as a thing in the context of the knowledge graph and all the associated attributes. Everything known about your brand online as an entity and the way it appears, I don't think it's ever going to be as simple as TF IDF, which is, the frequency that the brand appears in a document. However, when it is specifically looking for a brand, having that actual brand mention, it doesn't need to be a link. I think, having the brand mention will matter. Anyway, thank you all so much for coming. I will send over the replay as well as the deck. Check out all of those links. If you have any questions, feel free to find me on Twitter, X, LinkedIn, and I have actually moved over and been spending a lot of time on Blue Sky recently, or just email me directly, Garrett@iPullRank.com. Appreciate you all. And we are helping people as well with the Profound group. So if you go over and try out that software and you need some help in terms of kind of your content strategy and appearing in ChatGPT, that is something that iPullRank offers. So you can go to our contact form at iPullRank.com, fill out a request there and set up a consultation. But you all have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the holidays. Keep in mind the bias when you're searching. When you yourself are searching, you'll catch yourself next time. Next time you go to search something on Google, you'll catch your own bias. But thanks again, and I will see you all around the interwebs. Peace out.